I'm Diane Macedo. Today on ABC News Live, we have breaking news. A spokesman for House Speaker Nancy Pelosi says an intruder violently assaulted her husband. We are live outside their San Francisco home with the new details just coming in. Democrats and Republicans are calling in their heavyweights. Former President Obama is hitting the campaign trail in Georgia as top GOP leaders come to Herschel Walker's defense. The race is to watch with 11 days to go. And Elon Musk controls Twitter. The world's richest man just closed the $44 billion deal. Now he's reportedly already firing top executives. We have the latest on the fallout and what comes next. But we begin with that breaking news. President Biden has spoken now with House Speaker Nancy Pelosi after a violent break-in at her home. A spokesman for Pelosi says an intruder assaulted Paul Pelosi, the Speaker's husband. ABC News' Mola Lenghi is outside the Pelosi residence, and Elizabeth Schulze is in Washington with more on this. Mola, what do we know at this point about this attack?
Well, Diane, according to the San Francisco Police Department, overnight, around 2:30 a.m., someone broke into the Pelosi home. Police say during the incident, 82-year-old Paul Pelosi was attacked. He was taken to the hospital where he is recovering. The suspect was taken into custody. No motive has been determined yet, whether this was a random act, a targeted act, perhaps a politically motivated attack. We simply do not know that. Police have not yet determined a motive. There is still a police presence out here at the Pelosi home. This is an affluent San Francisco neighborhood called the Pacific Heights neighborhood. Now, Speaker Pelosi's office saying that Mr. Pelosi was violently assaulted, adding that he is receiving excellent medical care and expected to make a full recovery. Now, we understand, according to the Speaker's office, that Nancy Pelosi was not in San Francisco at the time of the attack. Now, this is not the first attack on the Pelosi home. It was vandalized last year, and the garage door graffitied. Again, the big outstanding question at the moment is motive here. A suspect has been taken into custody. A motive has not yet been determined, whether this was a general sort of street crime or something else. Local PD, San Francisco Police Department, is taking the lead on this investigation and getting some assistance also from Capitol Hill Police as well as the FBI. Diane?
And Elizabeth, the other big question hanging in the balance is Pelosi's surrounded by security all the time. So how does this happen, even if she wasn't there in San Francisco?
Diane, great point. We know that Pelosi has an extensive security detail. She is followed by numerous Capitol police officers, and we are informed by those officers that they were with her last night as she was in Washington, D.C. But what is unclear is exactly what the security presence is when her husband is not with her. And we do know that there is security, at least cameras at the house, but how many officers are there? That's the question. Capitol Police in their statement did say that they're going to send a unit from their East Coast division over to help with this investigation. This is now a joint investigation between San Francisco Police, FBI, and Capitol Police. Diane.
And Elizabeth, both the president and Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer have now expressed their support for the speaker and her family. What are you hearing in D.C.?
Right, Diane. The White House and Senate Majority Leader Schumer said they both called Speaker Pelosi this morning to speak with her and give condolences that this happened. The president, Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre, said that the president expressed his support for the horrible attack and continues to condemn all violence. You know, this is part of a broader trend that we are seeing, Diane. Just these incidences of violence and threats against lawmakers have risen exponentially in the past few years here in Washington.
And Mola, with these questions swirling still about, how this happened and the fact that we don't know the motivation of this crime, what's it like there right now in that neighborhood?
Well, you got to remember, early in the morning, folks are just waking up to this news. We've had some, joggers, a lot of people driving by, people riding their bikes, stopping, slowing down. Heard a lady asking some of the police officers here on scene how often this sort of thing happens. This is an affluent neighborhood, again, in San Francisco. But we do have some statistics on recent crime. And year over year here in San Francisco, assault is up 11%, robbery is up 5%, total crime up 7% throughout the city. Just some things to note, Diane.
All right. Well, as you said, Mola, the spokesperson for the family is saying that Paul Pelosi is expected to make a full recovery. But, of course, still a developing story. We appreciate you both staying on top of it for us, and we will continue to give viewers updates as we get them. Mola Lenghi, Elizabeth Schulze, thank you both. Former President Barack Obama is hitting the campaign trail in Georgia today. He's hoping to rally support for Democratic Senator Raphael Warnock in the race that could decide control of the Senate. It comes as top Republicans are coming to the defense of Herschel Walker, who's denying a new allegation that he paid for a second woman to get an abortion. Senior White House correspondent Mary Bruce has the latest.
Both sides calling in their party heavyweights in the final stretch here in Georgia. Democrats turning not to President Biden, but his old boss, former President Obama, today with his first rally of the campaign season, throwing his support behind Stacey Abrams for governor and Senator Raphael Warnock. He's locked in a tight race with Republican Herschel Walker. Top GOP leaders like Senators Lindsey Graham and Ted Cruz now rallying around Walker, coming to his defense after a second woman claimed Walker paid for her to have an abortion. The former football star, who is publicly opposed to abortion, has said it's a lie.
I can tell you right now, they can't take me down because I'm a bad man. I can tell you that right now.
But he's not answering further questions.
Do you know the woman behind this ladies now? Were you in a relationship with her, Mr. Walker? Have you ever pressured a woman to have an abortion, Mr. Walker?
With the race tightening, Walker's supporters tell us the allegations, even if true, don't matter.
There's no proof at 13 days before the election, so it has no bearing with me at all.
If Walker helped women, pressured a woman to get abortion in the past, does that matter?
What you do when you're in your sinning phase of life, which, I would not hold it against him.
Democratic leaders showing some concern. The top Democrat in the Senate, Chuck Schumer, caught on an open mic.
Now, Schumer doing a bit of cleanup after that, telling a reporter Democrats are doing well across the board, that he does think they will ultimately keep the Senate. But, Diane, as you know, so much of this always comes down to turnout. And here in Georgia, they're actually breaking records. Nearly 1.3 million ballots have already been cast. That's nearly on par with the early vote in the 2020 presidential race. Diane.
All right, Mary Bruce, thank you. And I want to bring in ABC News political reporter Brittany Shepard live now for more on this. Brittany, former President Obama could not hold on to control of the Congress during the midterm elections when he was actually president. How much of an impact do you think he can have this time around?
Well, Democrats are hoping he has a huge impact. They are going to the mattresses by bringing their toughest, most impactful surrogate, Obama, to the Peach State. The party overwhelmingly supports him. In fact, they support him over President Joe Biden. His favorability ratings are almost 50% over President Biden's approval ratings here. And there's lots of critical issues happening in Georgia. Probably principally for Democrat is a split ticket, meaning that there's lots of Democratic support for Raphael Warnock, but not so much for Stacey Abrams, which is an issue for Democrats nationally. I mean, keep the Senate is one thing, but losing the gubernatorial mansions is a big deal for President Biden, kind of losing his agenda. We have gun rights, abortion, Roe v. Wade, election security. If you lose the gubernatorial mansion, you kind of can't legislate on any kind of local level. So they're hoping that Obama can kind of galvanize that support against Stacey Abrams in her rematch against Brian Kemp.
Now, President Biden, on the other hand, he is expected to campaign in Philadelphia today, but for the most part, he's been staying off the campaign trail, touting his economic policies instead. What's the strategy there?
Well, he's been essentially ghosting voters. It's been pretty fascinating. At the same part in the campaign for both Trump and Biden, they've had at least a dozen campaign rallies. Biden's actually taking a book from one of part of Obama's advice is to remind voters that you can make their life cheaper and easier. That's why he's been stressing his economic agenda. That's why he's been pulling oil out of the strategic reserve. That's why he's been trying to be in conversation with Saudi Arabia and try to remind voters that he can make their life a little bit cheaper.
And while I have you, Elon Musk now controls Twitter. A lot of people are wondering, will he allow former President Trump back on the platform? How could that impact the election cycle if that happens in the coming days?
Talk about an October surprise. I mean, I don't think Trump will make a big impact with getting voters out in the polls, but he's been quick to decry election denierism. And if he's back on the platform by the beginning of November, he can give a lot of credence to a lot of election deniers who, if they come out empty, we're going to need his support at the top.
All right, Brittany Shepard, we appreciate it. Thank you. Meanwhile, state election workers are facing a tight supply of a critical voting resource, paper. Federal officials say more than 90% of all votes these midterms will be on paper ballots, but supply chain issues have made them harder to come by. Now, some experts say it exposes a key vulnerability. Senior Washington reporter Devin Dwyer has more.
At one of the nation's largest ballot printers, it's a final sprint to Election Day.
All the ballots get printed on these machines. They run at 500 feet per minute, so we will move about 20,000 ballots every hour.
Rumbeck Election Services is delivering 50 million midterm ballots across 10 states using 5 million pounds of paper. And this year, there's little room for error.
Capacity has come out of the paper industry. It used to, there were lots of paper mills in the U.S. and North America. Those have been closing down or converting over to cardboard boxes. It's more profitable for the mills. It's a very real threat.
Supply chain issues that have jolted the U.S. economy during the pandemic have been hitting election suppliers hard, causing shortages of envelopes, cardstock, and even stickers. Roughly 30 million pounds of paper are needed for a major election year. And experts say the supply crunch exposes a key vulnerability.
And it's not just any kind of paper. Ballots are printed on special heavyweight material like this so that automated vote tabulators can read it.
In a nationwide alert, the U.S. Election Assistance Commission warns state election officials of an unprecedented demand for ballot paper, with very long order lead times and a risk that some urgent last-minute orders this year may not be fulfilled.
We need to make sure that we're paying extra close attention to proofing of all materials, because if there was a typo or is a typo, your vendor might not be able to fill an emergency order in that way.
Members of Congress have also been sounding the alarm, holding urgent hearings on election supply chain risks.
There's that concern that it just won't show up.
There have already been isolated signs of trouble. In January, the paper shortage forced Texas officials to strictly limit printing of voter registration forms. During Pennsylvania's May primary, 2/3 of mail-in ballots in Lancaster County were unreadable by scanner machines because of a printing mistake and had to be processed by hand. And on the day we visited Phoenix, local officials discovered 6,000 ballots had been printed with major errors, requiring a second print and more paper.
We're all just collectively crossing our fingers and hoping that the supply chain works just fine and that we don't have any issues where a county has to, in large scale, purchase a whole bunch of envelopes or a whole bunch of ballots, because that's when it could manifest itself.
The government is so concerned about paper ballot production that the Department of Homeland Security has declared printers like these critical infrastructure.
We went through the process with Homeland Security, CISA, and Department of Commerce to get defense production authorization. So when we put an order in for paper, and Amazon puts an order in for paper, we're going to take precedence over Amazon. And that was to help just to make sure we would have the stock we needed.
With early voting underway in 33 states, election watchdogs say the ballot paper crunch has not yet become a crisis. The Election Assistance Commission telling ABC News it should not impact voting in the general election so far.
This is actually a good example of a success story. And largely, there has been aversion of a major crisis because of that coordination and that communication.
But experts caution Election Day could still bring surprises, and those may be especially consequential at a time when election integrity is already in the spotlight.
It's not realistic to think that the problem is solved. It's not.
What's your message for 2024?
Be prepared. Start planning early. Planning. It's the only way to overcome this.
Our thanks to Devin Dwyer for that report, and we will have full coverage of the midterm elections on election night, November 8th, starting 7 p.m. Eastern right here on ABC News Live. And be sure to check out Power Trip, hosted by George Stephanopoulos. We'll have back-to-back episodes airing on ABC News Live Saturday at 6 p.m. Eastern, Sunday at 5 p.m. Eastern, and streaming anytime on Hulu. Coming up, Elon Musk is now in control of Twitter and reportedly already firing top executives. The latest on the fallout and what comes next when we come back. Welcome back. Elon Musk has now dubbed himself Chief Twit on his Twitter profile after taking control of the company. The $44 billion deal makes Twitter a private company with no shareholders to answer to. And Musk has reportedly already started firing top executives. Our Amola Lengi has the latest.
Elon Musk celebrating his new ownership of Twitter with a tweet saying the bird is freed. A source telling ABC News that Musk's first move, immediately firing several top executives, including the CEO, Parag Agrawal, and CFO, Ned Segal, after closing a deal originally valued at $44 billion.
I think it was very clear that Elon wanted to shake up the leadership of Twitter. He singled out some of the executives that he fired on Thursday in the past and said, that he had problems with specific decisions that they had made.
Decisions like banning former President Trump from the platform after allegedly inciting violence during the January 6th insurrection. In a statement tweeted to advertisers, Musk says the reason he acquired Twitter is to have a common digital town square, but saying Twitter obviously cannot become a free-for-all hellscape where anything can be said with no consequences.
Twitter has struggled for years to actually get control of some of the worst things that happen on its platform. And so the big question is, how can you expect, as Elon Musk, to cut back on moderation or cut down staff and not have this problem just get worse?
After initially trying to buy Twitter in April, he said he plans to change the platform's moderation policies, eliminate spam, and be more transparent on how algorithms promote content. Musk hinting of a new era of Twitter earlier this week, tweeting a video of himself walking into the building with a sink with the caption, "Entering Twitter HQ." Let that sink in.
Our thanks to Mola Lenghi for that report. And Brazil is now just days away from a high-stakes presidential election. Two political titans and bitter rivals are going head-to-head in an election that could impact U.S. economic policy. Maxine Margolis, senior research scholar at the Institute of Latin American Studies at Columbia University, joins me now with more on this. Maxine, thanks for being here. What's the latest on this race, and what is each candidate promising to bring to the table?
Well, there's what's going on with the race right now is there's a great deal of polarization. There's some people are worried that there's going to be some kind of violence if the race is very close. And the biggest fear is that Bolsonaro and his followers will not recognize Lula if Lula wins fair and square. And in fact, Bolsonaro has not promised to go along with the election. He says he will only go along with it if it's clean, but he doesn't say what he means by clean. So there's a good deal of nervousness in Brazil and among Brazil's allies nationwide. After all, Brazil is the 8th largest economy in the world. And this particular election, it has been said, is the single most important one in decades in Latin America.
Now, more and more countries in Latin America are electing left-leaning leaders. How do you explain this regional shift?
I really think the bottom line is that there is such a great deal of economic inequality that politicians have promised to deal with. And yet they don't. As several of these economies have gotten weaker, the problem of inequality, of economic inequality, has only gotten worse. And I think that's the reason, probably the main reason, for the shift to the left in many South American countries.
All right, Maxine Margolis, we appreciate your time today. Thank you.
You're very welcome.
Coming up, tomorrow marks 10 years since Hurricane Sandy hit the Northeast, including here in New York City. When we come back, what we've learned about the links between climate change and extreme weather. Welcome back. Tomorrow marks 10 years since Hurricane Sandy hit the Northeast. Here in New York City, 44 people lost their lives, and the storm caused $19 billion in damages. Now, a decade later, New York City Mayor Eric Adams is announcing new steps he says are critical to ensuring the city is better protected from storms like Sandy in the future.
We still feel that pain. We don't have another 100 years to prepare. We have to prepare now. Climate change is here, it's clear, and it is a present danger.
Let's go to researcher at the Columbia Climate School, Andrew Kruskevich, with more on this. Andrew, thank you for being here. In your research, what sticks out to you about Sandy, and which was called a superstorm at the time? And what do you think about where we are now compared to where we were 10 years ago?
Yeah, thanks for having me and for highlighting this topic. So some of the key elements of Sandy that should be, let's say, highlighted are just the extent of the impact that we saw. This was a superstorm, so it was a bit different than a hurricane, but many of the impacts were hurricane-like. What I mean by that is the coastal areas really bore the brunt of many of the impacts, such as storm surge, strong winds, for example. But this was really a storm surge type of system. And we saw that. We saw the impact up and down the coast of New Jersey, Staten Island, the Rockaways. That is one of the most important takeaways. We will likely not see a storm that's exactly like Sandy for a very long time. However, there are other storms that we have seen already, such as Ida. These are bringing similar impacts, but also different. So I think we need to talk about Sandy as the type of superstorm that it was, but also not wait for another Sandy. We're already seeing other types of storms, including storms that are leading to significant impact here in New York.
Now, you say, because a lot of people do say, when will the next Sandy hit, right? That's been a big topic of discussion since Sandy hit 10 years ago. Yeah. You say that's not the best way to think about this. Why not?
Well, it's just every storm is different, you know, and there's many ingredients that make a disaster. So if we're waiting for the same type of storm, for example, we could be missing the signs, the signals of other storms that are approaching. We saw this with Sandy to some extent when the year before we had Tropical Storm Irene come ashore right here in New York City, and to some there was the perception that it was a false alarm, that there was a miss here in New York City at least. However, this really wasn't the case. That event led to very significant impact outside of New York City, but still here in New York, that was the narrative. There were some discussions even afterwards. Well, we were comparing Sandy to Irene the year before, and we were listening to the messages that it was a different type of system, so perhaps not as strong. So the bottom line is we need to look at each storm differently, and we need to have better communication about the impacts from these storms, and also make sure that the people within the communities, the underserved communities, these messages are communicated in an effective way so that people could take action. It's not just about alerting or warning. It's about, are people taking action, and are the right people, are the people who need to take action, do they have the means to do so?
Andrew, it does also feel like we're hearing more and more, 100-year storm, a storm that only happens once in 100 years. It feels like we hear about those happening more and more and more. Are we also acquiring more knowledge on how to cope with extreme weather?
Yes, and actually that's one of the topics that we're leading on here at Columbia University's Climate School, is understanding the different ingredients. You know, the climate is an important ingredient in disasters, but it's not the only one. There's socioeconomic factors, there's infrastructure, there's cultural factors of why we see this disproportionality of impact from some communities and others. With Ida last year, we saw many people lose their lives, unfortunately, and a total that wasn't far from Sandy. However, the other impacts from Ida were very different from Sandy. We didn't see the large-scale socioeconomic impacts. We didn't see the impact on Wall Street, for example. Therefore, the response to Ida has not been as significant as Sandy. And I think that was a missed opportunity. I think we need to focus on this disproportionality of impact. Are the actions that we're taking, and we are taking action, are they impacting the most underserved populations? And how do we focus on that?
All right, Andrew Kuskevich, we appreciate your time today and your research. Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you for joining us. I'm Diane Macedo. Do stay with us as ABC News Live continues with more news, context, and analysis.
Hi everyone, George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News YouTube channel. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch live event coverage, click on the right over here to subscribe to our channel, and don't forget to download the ABC News app for breaking news alerts. Thanks for watching.